I rise to speak on Bill C-56, the Liberals' so-called Affordable Housing and Groceries Act. I say so-called because nothing in this bill will make housing affordable or reduce grocery prices. After 8 long years of these Liberals, Canadians are facing an unprecedented affordability crisis. Let's look at the facts. After 8 years of these Liberals, housing costs have doubled, rent has doubled, mortgage payments have more than doubled. They're up 150% compared to 8 years ago. Canadians, after 8 years of these Liberals, have seen 40-year high inflation. Meanwhile, interest rates are rising at the fastest rate in Canadian history and have reached a 22-year high, and interest rates are projected to be hiked even further. When it comes to essentials like groceries, prices have gone up a staggering 70%, resulting in nearly 2 million Canadians a month going to the food bank. More than 2 million Canadians a month at the food bank. That's what Canadians are facing after 8 years of these Liberals. A dire situation in which Canadians are struggling to put food on the table and to keep a roof over their head. Madam Speaker, it begs the question, why is it that Canada faces an affordability crisis? There is one person who bears primary responsibility, and that is this Prime Minister. It is this Prime Minister who has created an affordability crisis as a result of 8 years of reckless spending. This is a Prime Minister who in 8 years has run up the largest deficits, a Prime Minister who in 8 years managed to double the national debt. So reckless and so out of control is the spending on the part of this Prime Minister that this Prime Minister has managed to do the seemingly impossible, and that is to rack up more debt in 8 years than all of his predecessors over the previous 150 years. This is a Prime Minister who thought it was a good idea to pay for his out-of-control, reckless spending to print, through the Bank of Canada, $600 billion. As a result, the money supply has increased 8 times faster than economic growth. Mr. Speaker, 8 times faster than economic growth. Is it any wonder that in the face of that, Canadians have seen 40-year high inflation and interest rates rising faster than ever before? So, Madam Speaker, that is the record of these Liberals after 8 years. That is what they have to show. They have manufactured a cost of living crisis, and everyday Canadians are hurting. And so, in the face of that, what have these Liberals done, or what are they doing to address the issue of affordability, the mess that they have created? Well, Madam Speaker, earlier this week, Canadians got the answer, and that is based upon the Finance Minister presenting the government's fall economic statement. And what do we get from this Finance Minister? We got $20 billion in new deficit spending. $20 billion in new deficit spending on top of the more than $100 billion of deficit spending that this Finance Minister has racked up in the 3 years that she has held that portfolio. $20 billion in new deficit spending that pours fuel on the inflationary fire and is sure to keep interest rates high. $20 billion in new deficit spending, notwithstanding the fact that even the Bank of Canada is calling on these Liberals to rein in their spending and has made clear to this Liberal government that their reckless spending and money printing is contributing to inflation. $20 billion in new deficit spending, notwithstanding that Scotiabank issued a report recently that confirmed that 2%, a full 2% of interest rates are directly attributable to this government's inflationary spending. And so Canadians have been hit after 8 years of these Liberals with a double whammy: high inflation and high interest rates, and they're now also being hit with a third whammy in the way of these Liberals' punitive carbon tax. It is a tax that these Liberals falsely sold as a means to address GHGs, to reduce GHGs, but we know that after 8 years of these Liberals, GHGs have gone up, not down. And I would remind Liberals across the way who talk so much about climate action that the COP27 rankings ranked Canada after 8 years of these Liberals at 58 out of 63 countries. But I digress. The carbon tax, Madam Speaker, is nothing more than another tax. But I qualify that because it's not quite that. It is, after all, a tax that disproportionately impacts lower and middle-income Canadians. It is a tax that increases the cost of everything, including on essentials such as food, fuel, and heating. And it is a tax that, according to both the Bank of Canada and the Parliamentary Budget Officer, is exacerbating inflation. And, Madam Speaker, despite that, and despite the fact that Canadians are facing an affordability crisis, with nearly half of Canadians $200 away from insolvency, what is this Liberal government's plan? Their plan is to quadruple their punitive carbon tax on hard-working, everyday Canadians. And so, Madam Speaker, I say to the Liberals across the way that I would be very keenly interested to see if one of them can stand up in their place and explain to Canadians how the policies of this government, namely money printing, massive deficits, the quadrupling of the carbon tax, all of which are exacerbating inflation and increasing interest rates, are a policy prescription that is going to make life more affordable for Canadians. Madam Speaker, very simply, those policies are making life less affordable. Canadians are paying a very dear price after 8 years of the costly policies of this Liberal Prime Minister. And so, Madam Speaker, let me say in closing that after 8 long years of these Liberals, costs are up, rent is up, taxes are up, debt is up, and this government's time is up. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Bravo.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, the legislation that the member is debating is very substantial. I know he wanted to talk a lot about the fall economic statement, but this legislation is good legislation that's going to support Canadians in many different ways, especially when it comes to the issue of giving more authority and power to the Competition Bureau. It's also going to provide literally thousands of new homes homes into the future. People are concerned in terms of just the reckless behavior of the Conservative Party today. We have no sense. You know, they say you listen to some speeches, they seem to be in support of the legislation. You listen to other speeches, they seem to be against the legislation. Look what happened with the Ukraine legislation. At the end of the day, every one of them voted against Ukraine. That's fine. There's their prerogative. Hopefully some of them will take a flip-flop and support Ukraine-Canada trade deal going forward. I won't hold my breath. But what is the Conservative Party collectively going to do on this legislation? Do they support it or not?
St. Albert, Edmonton.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm glad that the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary referred to changes that are being made to the Competition Act, because the amendments put forward in this bill pertaining to the Competition Act are copied and pasted from the private member's bill introduced by the member for Bay of Quinte. Very simply, it would remove the efficiencies defense with respect to mergers. That could, in the long term, have an impact in increasing competition in the groceries sector and therefore have some long-term impact upon prices. But Canadians can't wait 5 years or 7 years down the road. They need relief today, and all this government has offered them is the quadrupling of the carbon tax.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's good to stand in the House today to talk about a very important bill, and this is the idea that we're going to get some purpose-built rental built. We're going to get some rental housing built, and to the member's point, it's not going to be as fast as we need, and that's why we need other measures outside of this bill. But on this bill, there's people in my community that are waiting for purpose-built rentals. So I'd like to see this go through, but I'd like to see more. I'd like to see more than what's in this bill. So can the member share some of the solutions that they have? I believe that the Conservatives can support this bill and improve it. So let's see what you've got.
Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And with respect to the GST issue or measure with respect to rental housing, this is something the Liberals had promised 6 years ago and only now are acting upon, and it is provided for by the bill put forward by the Leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, the Building Homes Not Bureaucracy Act. That bill is a common-sense piece of legislation that is aimed at getting gatekeepers out of the way by tying infrastructure dollars to the number of homes actually built. This government has thrown billions and billions of dollars, and yet we have seen fewer houses being built in the past year than in 1972, when Canada's population was half of what it is today. The record of these Liberals is to build up bureaucracy, not houses. The plan of the Leader of the Opposition is to get homes built for Canadians.
Kitchener Centre.
Madam Speaker, the member for St. Albert, Edmonton spent a lot of his time talking about the quadrupling of the carbon tax, but absent from the conversation was the quadrupling of the rebates that go with it. And I mention this because we all then get emails in our inboxes from constituents who have been misled by these kinds of statements. Can the member make clear whether he believes that rebates also go back to Canadians? And then secondly, can he speak to any concern he might have with the fact that the carbon tax went up 2 cents a litre last year and the profits of the oil and gas industry went up 18 cents a litre as they gouge Canadians at the pumps? That's what's truly driving affordability, and I'm curious if he cares about that at all.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Well, with respect, Madam Speaker, the member should get his facts straight, and a good place to start would be to review the report of the Parliamentary Budget Officer that established that more than 60% of Canadians lose out in the carbon tax. In other words, they pay more than they get back in the way of a rebate. Madam Speaker, what needs to happen, what Canadians are asking very simply, is that we axe the tax, and that is something that Conservatives are going to do to keep the...
Resuming debate.